All right, folks, today we're looking to look at part one of your review book, and I'm going to set you up for a little review of the peopling of the 13 American colonies. As we go through, as always, I'm going to highlight what we've seen on exams so we can really hone in on those things that kind of show up come exams time, and then in the end, we'll be able to do a little practice for you. So, the people and peopling of the 13 American colonies. The whole reason behind this is so you can get set up with who is settling in the American colonies. Well, first and foremost, there's a group of people already here, Native Americans. All right. What we need to know about Native Americans is they were not one Native American tribe. There were multiple tribes that they were not all the same. They fought with each other. They befriended each other. They traded with each other. And, some of the relations with the colonists are going to be good and some of it not so good. So second thing, we're going to have a series of colonists who end up migrating to the colonies. There will end up being 13 of them, and we'll see a few maps later on. They're split up between New England colonies, middle colonies, and southern colonies. And then, of course, our third group that we're going to talk about is the African slaves who were brought here via the slave trade to work mainly in southern colonies on large plantations. All right, so the first group, Native Americans. All right, there's about 15 million Native Americans living in North America alone before the Europeans came. That's in the late 1400s. Once again, Columbus sails the ocean blue in 1492, right? Their life was influenced by their environment, allowing them to either farm, they hunted, they fished. Some of them were nomadic. Some of them did develop permanent settlements and stay in the same place for a long time until the soil was not good enough to farm anymore. They exhausted the soil, and then they moved elsewhere. All right. Trade was very important to these groups. They trade various products. The one thing they did not have was metal workings. So when the Europeans came, they really wanted the metal objects that the Europeans had, like muskets and pots and pans and those sorts of things. All right. So we take a good look right now at Native American groups. Realize, number one, you kind of have different sections here. There's different climates. This is nice and hot down here down south. It's very dry over here in the southwest of America. And then up here we have the eastern woodlands. Well, we live over here in right around here in Buffalo and Lackawanna, so we may be we may know about the Iroquois Nation. And there's 6 tribes there. You may have heard of the Seneca or the Onondaga or the Mohawk. Those are the Indians around us, right? So you can kind of take a look at the map here and see what's going on. Southwest, eastern woodlands, and each one of those tribes kind of live differently depending on the agriculture and the climate and the rainfall and the heat and cold that they had to deal with. So realize that. I mean, when you take a look at the map here, you see a bunch of different Native American tribes. So there they are. The Iroquois Confederacy, once again, is the one that we are going to be mostly familiar with, right? They're the most powerful government in the eastern woodlands. There are 6 tribes that banded together, and for the most part, what we find in history is when you have large numbers of people, they tend to command a lot of power, all right? Formed in 1570, 6 smaller Native American groups. This confederacy, I mentioned that. They were so powerful, they were able to hold onto their land despite pressures from the Europeans, especially the French and the English, who settled in and around the Great Lakes region. The Spanish will be much more south. They're not the Spanish aren't around there. And you can kind of take a look at the 6 nations, right? Seneca, the Cayuga, the Onondaga, the Tuscarora, the Oneida, and then the Mohawk up in the Catskills here. Trade and alliances. Colonists and Native Americans either traded or made alliances, or at some points they engaged in warfare. They did fight each other. All right. Jamestown, our first English permanent settlement, only survives in 1607 because the settlers traded weapons for food with the Powhatan Confederacy. And the Powhatan chief at that time, his name was Chief Powhatan. He had a daughter, you may know her. Her name was Pocahontas. All right. Native Americans offered food to the Plymouth colony in 1620. So you can see very early on, the early English settlements, they tended to trade with the Native Americans that were there. All right. Different views and values. Europeans thought they were better and tried to convert natives to Christianity. You may have remembered or maybe heard about in 10th grade, the year before this, you may have heard about something referred to as the white man's burden. They really pushed their religion onto these Native Americans, all right? Land is going to be most important, all right? If you had land, you had power. So Europeans that they felt that land could be bought and sold and it basically owned. Natives felt that no one could technically own land. It was communal. It was to be used by everyone. So there's kind of a battle here over how we view land. We have this tendency of saying land is owned, where natives are like, they didn't really understand the concept of land ownership. Land could be used by everyone. All right. Now we have this intrusion of this new group coming in, the colonists. So let's talk about them. Who came to the colonies? A variety of different groups. Well, first of all, Africans were brought against their will in something known as the slave trade. And most of the African slaves that were brought here were forced to work on plantations, which are large farms down in the southern colonies. A variety of different groups immigrated to the colonies. The majority of these people are going to be English. But did other people come from other countries? Of course. You had Scots, Irish, and Germans, and Portuguese, and so forth. So there's a lot of different groups from Europe coming to the colonies. The biggest group, over 50% of them were from England. And we call them the English, and we call them English colonies. And guess what language they spoke? You got it, English, right? Most of the colony's population came from England, I already mentioned. You better know who indentured servants are, okay? So if you don't know who indentured servants are, it's real simple. The rich landowners living in the colonies, if they paid for you to come, let's say you were broke and you were a loser and you were over in England, you got no way to get here. Well, let's say that I was a rich plantation owner, right? I would pay for you to come. After I pay for your voyage, you just came to America, but now you owe me. So what happened with indentured servants is they usually owed between 7 to usually 4 to 7 years of service. So you had to work on my farm for 4 to 7 years. Why? I paid for you to come. That's the deal. After 7 years, you're free. I'm going to give you a piece of land and you get some tools and you can become a landowner. So you need to think about that. Did people take advantage of indentured servitude? If you were not a landowner in England, you can come to America. You can settle in a colony. Someone's going to pay for you to come. And if you worked for 7 years, you then become a landowner. Definitely, people came to the New World who were very poor, and they were indentured servants, so know who they are. So we got kind of two groups coming your way. Indentured servants, 7 years of labor, own a piece of land. Slaves, they had to work forever, they never got to own any land. All right. Why'd they come? Bunch of different reasons. There's religious reasons, economic reasons, and political reasons. So let's deal with the religious first. There was a group called Puritans and Separatists. One group wanted to purify the King of England's church, the Anglican church. The other group wanted to totally separate from that church. The problem is these people can't do that in England. They're persecuted against, and the king doesn't like it when you tell him his church is broke. So these people have to leave England, and they end up migrating to the New World, the Great Migration. We see a lot of these religious folks up in New England in colonies like Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay. You may have heard of a guy by the name of John Winthrop, those sorts of people, all right? Also, a bunch of Roman Catholics came. Because the King of England split with the Catholic Church, a bunch of Catholics were also being persecuted, so they came as well. They mainly settled in colonies like Rhode Island and Maryland. Catholics weren't allowed to go anywhere. There were specific colonies that they had to go to, all right? The biggest reason of all, you're going to find economics to really push people's buttons, right? You had an opportunity to own land, you're going to come to the New World. So what's the key here? Land ownership is power, land ownership is money. Right? Some people had to get away from the governmental persecution. The government didn't like them for whatever reason, and they came. But the economic reason is huge, and the religious reasons are very big as well. Right? What influenced their experience? I can't say geography enough. Geography. The climate, the rainfall, the heat, the cold will dictate what you can and can't do. So keep in mind, think about your country when you see where people settle. You can kind of get a feel for what kind of life they're going to have, all right? Ethnic groups tended to settle together. We like little ethnic neighborhoods. They feel comfortable, they know who their neighbors are, and that's where people are going to settle. Transportation was very difficult at this time. It was about a 2.5 month voyage to get to the colonies. By the time you got there, you were pretty famished and you had to survive. You need food, water, and shelter. So you got to get moving once you get here. All right. We'll talk about New England colonies, middle colonies, and then southern colonies. So Religion was very important in New England, not as important in the southern colonies. So keep that in mind. You have Puritans, you have separatists. The church membership was a must, and you had to worship. And that's what it was. Very cold up in New England. All right, and the soil was kind of rocky, kind of clay soil. Wasn't good. Very short growing season. Led to self-sufficient farming. They could only farm what they were going to use. They didn't have very large farms, and they didn't sell their farm products. They farmed what they had so they could maybe trade it with Native Americans or just eat it for themselves. Obviously, once it got cold, they had to do other things. They were shipbuilders. They built ironworks. They were goldsmiths and silversmiths and gunsmiths and things like that. They had a very diverse economy because they couldn't farm all year long. They did farm in the summer. They built shipping. They did trade. They fished. They were merchants and traders and all those sorts of things. If you wanted to remember where New England was, maybe, I hate the team, but you may want to think about the New England Patriots, right? Up here in Massachusetts, where the New England Patriots play. Our New England colonies are going to be Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts Bay, Plymouth, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. So these are the colonies that are up where? Up in New England. You got it, all right? The middle colonies. Obviously, the middle colonies are located in the middle. Pretty simple. Very diverse. If you think about the middle colonies, think about New York. New York City, New York State. Take a look around your school. You probably have a pretty diverse population. All right? There's not all one kind of people. That's kind of what New York is, all right? We benefited from the fertile soil. We grew a lot of wheat and corn. If you think about maybe Eden, New York, they got a lot of corn down there. If you go down to Pennsylvania, there's a ton of wheat and corn fields. So that's what we were growing in the middle colonies. Once again, only in the summer months. You're not going to find that stuff in January and February, all right? Exporting these products made the middle colonies the center of trade. They were great trading colonies. Think of New York City. Where are the trade centers today? New York City. Where's Wall Street? What do people do with their stocks on Wall Street? They trade them. All right, that's all New York City. All right. And here's a little map for you if you want to think about middle colonies. New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. Those are the middle colonies. Once again, what are these colonies up here? You better said the New England colonies, right? And once again, you're thinking about trading colonies down here. There's still some fishing that goes on. And down in here in Pennsylvania, southern Pennsylvania, you have those plush wheat and corn farms. And we're going to farm all right in through here during these summer months. This is kind of seen as the breadbasket of the colonies at this time. Southern colonies, obviously it's much warmer, longer growing seasons. They're going to farm all year long. They developed very large farms, plantation farms, almost commercial like. They were huge. They farmed 4 major cash crops. Once again, compare that with New England. New England, they were subsistence farmers. They farmed what they were going to eat and use. Down south, they're farming one product that they're going to sell. They're going to sell and they're going to make money off of it. So the 4 major cash crops are tobacco, rice, indigo, and eventually cotton will become king down south. Labor force began with indentured servants. Remember those people we talked about? They couldn't afford their way here. Someone else is going to pay it. They got to work for 7 years. Then they gain their freedom and they own a piece of land and they're looking good. Africans, however, enslaved Africans, they are tied to that land for as long as you own that person, until the Civil War. Our nation keeps slavery around from 1619 to 1865. So keep that in mind. Who's doing the majority of work on these large farms down south? African slave labor. What are the 4 major cash crops? Tobacco, rice, indigo, and eventually cotton. All right. So there's the southern colonies. Nice little map here. It's in your reading. You can go back and take a peek at it, right? You got geography. You got who came. You got what's going on. Diverse. They're trading. They're farming. Whatever. The lifestyle, and then influences on the government. Okay, so you might want to check that out. New England, middle, and southern colonies. So you might want to go back to that map, maybe right before a test or something. The next group that came, the Africans. African slavery was introduced in the Western Hemisphere by the Portuguese and Spanish. Was not started by the English, but they will later see that it's a viable labor source that they can use. All right, the Portuguese and Spanish started slavery down in the Caribbean. And those slaves were working on sugar cane plantations, right? It quickly spread to the colonies. Why? it's good labor, and it's kind of sad, but that's what they were using, right? Triangular trade in the Middle Passage. I'm going to show you a map about that. On your exam in June, they like to ask you about this triangular trade and what the Middle Passage was. So take good note of that. Okay, here it is. Goods that are coming from the colonies are going all the way over to Europe. So we're sending sugar, tobacco, and cotton. Basically, natural resources, raw materials are going from the colonies all the way over to Europe. What's going from Europe? They're going to take some manufactured goods. They're going to bring the rum. They're going to bring that stuff down to Africa, trade with the slave traders down here on the West Coast, and they're going to pick up, they're going to fill their boats up with slaves and bring them to the Americas. They like to stop down in the West Indies first, drop off the slaves, pick up some sugar cane, pick up some other slaves, and then bring them to the southern colonies where they're working on those large farms, farming tobacco, rice, indigo, and eventually cotton. All right. Slave resistance. You need to know that slaves weren't happy. I wouldn't be if I was a slave. So they're going to do things to kind of mess up the mojo on the plantation, on the farm. Now, there's two ways they can resist. There's overt and covert. So I don't know if you play any video games, but like covert ops are really secret ways. Overt are really just open resistance. So how could a slave kind of shut down production or slow down production? It's real easy. They can starve themselves. You cannot eat, and then you're real lethargic. You can't move, can't work, right? Some slaves actually killed themselves, all right? They either drowned themselves or they just hung themselves so they wouldn't have to work anymore. It's kind of sad, but that's what they did. That's how bad it was. So realize that did happen, right? Very open, you can just run away. You can try to escape. Chances are you'd be caught and brought back. If you did get away, you want to run north because slaves were freed in Canada and up in the northern colonies. Or plan rebellions. There's a series of slave rebellions that do occur. A couple instances they're somewhat successful where a bunch of white plantation owners are killed. Eventually those people, the slaves are rounded up and the slave resistance kind of ends. Usually what happens after that is that the white people get real strict with the rules after these rebellions. So realize that. Now, how else can you kind of shut down production? A very secret kind of way of resisting is to just simply work slow that day, right? I'm just, not feeling that. I'm going to go out to the plantation and just not move as fast, right? You can pretend to be sick. Right, I don't feel good today, boss or master. I just, I want to hang out because I don't feel right. Or you break the tools. It was real nice, right? You start killing the crops, right? You start, poking holes in them and things like that. And then you don't have to worry about it because the crops are dead or you don't have the right tools to do the job, all right? So those are two ways. That's it for this particular section, all right? For test tips, I'm going to throw a little slide on the end there for test tips for you. What you really want to look at in terms of the colonial period, this beginning period, why people came, what are they gaining, who's coming. You know a little something about the different colonies now, New England, Middle, and Southern, and you got a good idea about the triangular trade and Middle Passage. Let me go back to that for you. This right here, this is the Middle Passage, all right? So the whole thing is the triangular trade, and this little leg right here, bringing the slaves from Africa to the Americas, is the Middle Passage. So make sure you know that, all right? Good luck. If you want to watch this again, go ahead, and we'll see you next time.